Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre, hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to TV to film and beyond. Sometimes even from the beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
Hello.
Hi.
Good morning. Good afternoon and good evening.
Tomorrow.
Just hanging out.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you asked what am I doing?
I thought, it's weird because I thought it at you and you answered. It's, oh my God, it's finally happening.
You thought about me?
We're
wow.
scanning
Just
at each
sitting
other.
right across from you in studio.
I can't stop.
Yeah, we're in studio today.
Yeah.
Live in studio.
Live in studio. Live to recording.
Yeah. How does that work?
It.
It's live right now.
Yeah. I mean, we are alive.
No, but this is live. This is happening.
Oh, well, you can't hear the audience, but they are there. And
Is that the distinction between live and not live?
I think so.
You don't know. It's okay to say.
No,
I don't know everything.
I feel like if it was live, then yeah, there would be an audience and we wouldn't like edit it later. It would just sort of be whatever it is.
But if I'm standing in, like when Paul Rudd did the Saturday Night Live thing,
Sure.
he was live.
Uh-huh.
There was no audience.
Yeah, it's so live meaning it's broadcast the moment it's shot. So
Right.
yeah, that's what it means.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have anything to do with the audience.
No, I
as
guess
you
not. I guess
previously-
live theater would be an audience, but like live broadcast is just
Yeah, it could
it's
be like
going out
Winston
at the same.
Churchill being like, I'm going to tell you how
That would be a neat trick.
we're going to do all this now.
Also, great accent. It's like he's in the room with me.
He's also live.
Hey, what's up?
Live with Winston Churchill.
Welcome to Churchill Talk.
Oh, yeah. Did we not mention that Terror in Tandem is now going to be called Twinnings in Tandem?
Yeah,
We're
congratulations.
going to talk everything about Winston Churchill.
Congratulations
while we
to
drink
all the
tea.
older men out there. Now we're just going to talk World War II stuff.
While we drink tea. Twinnings
Yes.
tea
Oh.
from England.
Wonderful.
Okay. So really,
are
this
we doing
is still
today?
what? Oh, well, this is still a horror podcast as far
Nice.
as I know.
Oh, God.
I'm
spooky.
frightened
Yeah.
of what we've become. We're gonna deep dive on Wes Craven.
Wes Craven. That's awesome.
I've been craving some Wes.
And don't be craven. Just jump right in.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah,
that one,
my brain is.
That one landed like a thud.
Yeah.
That one landed like a lead Freddy Krueger.
Why don't you say it again?
Nah, I've already.
No, say it again.
I've already forgotten.
I would love to know it.
I don't remember.
You said, "Don't be craven."
Oh, just jump right in. Was that supposed to be a rim shot?
No, that was supposed to be a thud.
Oh.
You said it landed like a thud.
It did. It did. And you know what? Worth it.
Okay. So,
For the next 10 minutes, we're going to be deconstructing that joke.
Wes Craven is one of the foremost horror movie directors of our time.
Absolutely.
And this, he died on August 30th, a few years ago, of brain cancer.
Yeah, it was really
sadly.
sad.
So, we really wanted to do a deep dive on him. But before he died of brain cancer, his brain was alive with...
My God. What is happening? I don't even know what's going on anymore. So, Wes Craven is...
Come on, you have to admit that was funny, though. Okay, I'll start over.
So Wes Craven is part of what I think of as the fourth generation of like horror master directors. You've got the first being like you know, the silent films like F.W. Murnau and, Fritz Lang is another one. Then you've got like the Universal directors, James Whale, and Todd Browning.
Nobody knows these people. You have to tell them what movies they've created.
Oh, so the silent generation being like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu. And then you go into the 30s.
In what year? The 30s?
No,
40s,
those are like
the 20s?
the teens and the 20s.
Okay.
Then you move into the 30s and 40s with the Universal monsters, you know, Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy.
Right.
Those directed by like Todd Browning
Universal
and James Whale.
Studios.
Yeah, Universal Studios. The third generation is like in the 1960s.
With like Hitchcock?
Hitchcock doing some horror. You've got Mario Bava in Italy inventing the slasher genre and giallo films. You've got Terence Fisher and Hammer Films in England with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee kind of reinvigorating the Universal classic monsters. And then in the 70s, you've got the fourth generation. And these are the ones that really modernized horror movies and have the most influence on the movies we watch today. Those would be people like John Carpenter of Halloween, Tobe Hooper, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, George Romero with the Night of the Living Dead movies, and of course Wes Craven with
all of his movies.
What we're going to be talking about today. Yeah. And of that generation, John Carpenter and Dario Argento are really the only ones still with us. All the rest have passed on.
Sadly.
Yeah.
So I think that you're going to be talking a little bit about his early life, right?
A little bit. He's a fascinating start to this man's career. Anything but a traditional route. So Wes Craven was born in Cleveland in 1939. And
shout out to our Cleveland listener.
Yeah. Hey, what's up, Cleveland fam?
Cleveland rocks.
And Cleveland adjacent. So after graduating from college, he became a teacher and a professor in the 1960s. He sort of became a little bored with that. He wanted to branch out into filmmaking and started his career as a sound editor for the musician Harry Chapin, who did most famously Cats in the Cradle and the Silver Spoons.
Oh, I know that song.
So his first work in film was in the then burgeoning pornography industry. Wes Craven
Saucy.
was on the crew of an unspecified number of pornos, but most famously worked on Deep Throat, maybe the most famous porno of all time. So he, I mentioned that because a couple of reasons. It's increasingly rare. It's a little bit more common back in the 70s for folks to come up doing exploitation, softcore, and some pornography, and then transition into legitimate, quote-unquote legitimate work, however you want to define that. You don't see that so much nowadays. I think there's a very hard separation, pardon the pun.
I mean, there's even a separation between scripted and reality.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a definite lack of imagination in transferable skills. But the thing is, in watching Wes Craven's films sort of as a whole, when you watch a bunch of them, knowing this about him, you can really identify his sort of exploitation grindhouse streak that runs through his entire career, really. Never really leaves him.
However you want to view pornography, as far as if it's a feminist act or not, he definitely raises the bar on female lead and respectful female lead.
Well, we'll definitely get into that. So he was early on in his career. He was a writing partner with Sean Cunningham, who went on to direct the first Friday the 13th. Now, what has always fascinated me about Wes Craven, and I've come to a deeper appreciation, is he was the rare genre director who was wildly successful commercially. He was a huge hit making these big movies, but he still took risks. If you look at his films in between Nightmare and Scream, I'm going to get into a lot of oddball choices and risks. It was an interesting guy who didn't want to be pigeonholed, even though he sort of got pigeonholed as a horror director.
Speaking of like a long-term partner, Marianne Maddalena was his creative partner for 25 years and primary producer of most of his films. And she's the one that actually discovered the ghost face mask during location scouting. Right.
We talked about that in our masks episode. It was originally a fun house mask, a fun play. It was like an actual mask.
It was in someone's kid. It was in a kid's bedroom when they were doing location scouting.
It was based on the Edvard Munch's The Scream.
Yeah. She always had hopes of becoming a producer, and said Craven shepherded.
That's a tough one.
And mentored her to eventually become his creative partner and primary producer.
That's just another
lifting
incredible
women, shepherding
and male and female partnership, just like John Carpenter and Galen Hurd.
Yeah.
Was that Galen Hurd?
Spielberg and
Kathleen Kennedy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some of the common themes that really play, and actually, you know what? I want to back up a second. When I say exploitation, that's actually a very specific kind of filmmaking that came up in the late 60s and early 70s. So I'm not necessarily talking about exploiting somebody, like the adjective. It's a kind of film. So you think of like the Tarantino grindhouse, sort of trashy themes. Everything looks sweaty and grimy. It's like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is definitely very much an exploitation type film. It's just a very particular vibe. And that's very much where Wes Craven got his start, specifically with his first movie. But before we get into his movies, did you have anything?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about, sort of playing off of his early start and his work with Marianne Maddalena. He uses like a very strong female point of view in many of his movies. And he like really leans into and explores, maybe I would say enhances the final girl trope. So for those of you that may not know, in Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Gender in the Modern Horror Film, written in 1992 by Carol Glover, she coined the term final girl and the characterized common attributes which are among young female characters who survive the destruction of a crazed killer. The final girl appears in many horror subgenres, but it's most prevalent in the slasher film, which Wes Craven was known for. Slasher movies include a psychotic and often concealed killer who stalks adolescents who engage in illicit or sexual activities and kills them one by one with sharp objects. It's typically a knife.
Or a machete.
While not the first known entry of the slasher genre, John Carpenter's 1978 movie Halloween is one of the most well-known and most influential slasher horror, who also has a final girl, Laurie Strode. She's the prototypical final girl.
Oh, yeah. She's definitely the one I think everyone thinks about, but, you know, there are tons of movies with the quote-unquote final girl.
I would argue that Wes Craven has a bit of a feminist spin on his final girls, because in the Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream franchises, two final girls don't fit into Clover's characteristics. In particular, the implication that in order to survive, the final girl has to be a virgin.
Oh, well.
Can't have any...
In Scream, she was quite famously not.
Yeah. Right. So it's not true of Nancy Thompson, not true of Sidney Prescott. And so he takes almost a feminist approach on this trope.
I mean, it's great. It's such a draconian, like, medieval morality trope of, like, if you have sex, you're going to be murdered, and that's okay. That's the thing about slasher movies, especially early entries, is I feel like a lot of producers, they were like, well, if Jason is our main character, we need to make his murders palatable to the audience. So let's have him kill horny teenagers and people drinking and partying, because everyone hates that. And, you know, it's like he only kills undesirables.
Yes, right,
You know?
right. So I thought it was, thought it was really interesting because he seemed to have a very empowering take on creating the final girls in some of his most famous slasher movies, which I'm going to, talk a little bit more in depth when we get to our favorite.
The other
Wes
thing
Craven,
he
Wes
does
Craven.
With his female protagonists is, and it's unfortunately pretty authentic, is they get gaslit to shit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He sets them up in a way that they're constantly being abused.
Well, they're constantly telling everyone exactly what's going on and how to fix it, and like 90% of the murders in the movies are because no one's fucking listening to them. I know, like Heather Langenkamp in Nightmare on Elm Street is from the get-go is like, here's what's happening.
Her dad, who is like the chief of police, won't believe her.
That's another theme we should talk about is how Wes Craven depicts the police.
Yeah,
that runs through most of his movies. But I'm going to get started with his very first feature film, which I'm not going to call a recommendation, because just a hefty trigger warning on this one. It's a deeply disturbing film that depicts very graphic scenes of sexual violence. Now, the movie is Last House on the Left, and it was released in 1973. Now, Wes Craven wanted this film to be a sort of spiritual successor or remake to Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring. Now, it's very loosely that. The same sort of loose plot of murderers, kill and violate a young girl and then seek shelter out of necessity, unbeknownst to them, in the home of the parents of that girl. And it's all about sort of the veneer of civility in suburban America, of, how quickly these yuppie, NIMBY types can turn into savages when they realize what's happened. So basically what this young girl, 17-year-old Sandra Peabody, is going to a concert. She's waylaid by a family, and she's brutalized. It's very intense and very hard to watch. It's very graphic.
In his last interview, he said that he has never been able to watch it.
Yes. Well, I'll get to that actually. Now, they end up killing Sandra, so she doesn't come home. They seek shelter in this house. Turns out they find out overnight that it's the parents. Then the parents discover that these people, the reason their daughter didn't come home is these people killed her and they raped her. And so the parents take out a very bloody revenge. It involves a lot of sexual mutilation and violence and things like that. And the parents really go to town on this group. And it's not that you feel for them, but it's tough. So getting back to what you said.
Relentless violence is how it's been described.
It is relentless. I'm not going to describe what happens, because why? But now I'm going to say, in the film's favor, it is a pretty classic example of grindhouse exploitation filmmaking. It's a tight, taut, nasty piece of filmmaking. It tonally is strange, though. There are moments of sort of slapstick humor that I feel like Wes Craven felt like he had to shoehorn in there because everything else was so bleak. But it really clashes, and it's strange. Now, it had a notoriously difficult time making this movie. Basically, everyone involved in it has disavowed the film, including Wes Craven. Wes Craven never intended for it to be released widely. He thought it was going to be a small, limited production that would sort of build up his bona fides and he could get more work. Turns out it was released like a normal movie and almost killed his career because it was very controversial, very graphic. People went nuts, as they do. Problem also is one of the actors, the actor who played the the chief antagonist, like the crazed rapist monster, was a method actor playing a crazed rapist monster. So he terrorized everyone on set, especially Sandra Peabody, who played the young girl, to the degree that, you know, he was waving a knife around. He was leaving disturbing notes during the scenes of sexual violence. Apparently he was very physical, where producers had to step in. So
scary.
Yeah, it was not great. You know, Wes Craven seems like he was trying for something. He was probably in over his head, and to his credit, he spent the rest of his career really owning up to the mistakes made during that movie.
Well, from what you're describing, honestly, it sounds like he was maybe taking some influence because a year earlier, Clockwork Orange had come out, and that very famously has sexual violence, non-sexual violence, and parody, and you know,
I will argue done much more successfully than Wes Craven was able to.
Well, it's
Wes
based
Craven,
on a book too, so that
and
makes a big
Wes
difference.
Craven was a young, you know, kind of untested filmmaker at this point, whose background was mostly doing crew work for pornos. So it's a movie I've seen once and I don't want to see again. I think I would only recommend watching it if you're a Wes Craven completist and you want to see the body of his work. Give it a shot, but it's you know, just a hefty warning to anybody out there for the content.
Warning.
But you know, honestly, it's definitely not his worst movie in terms of quality of film. It's for what it sets out to do. It is largely effective, but it's a miracle that it didn't kill his career, and I'll get to that in my next one.
Well, there's a lot of opportunities for his career to be killed. So
yeah, I mean, sure, yeah.
Well, do you want to take a little break?
I do.
Okay,
I do.
Great.
I want to take a long, extended break.
Are you struggling to find recipes that fit your budget and your unique tastes? Sick of the same old methods of seasoning and drying meat for your cannibalistic cravings? Well, we're here to tell you about a new delivery service called Hello Flesh. With Hello Flesh, you'll be able to explore the culinary side of cannibalism in a new and exciting way. No more dry, sinuous, tasteless human meat. With Hello Flesh, you can be adventurous with our themed boxes like Tropical Saviors, He Was a Jerk, a Jamaican-inspired rub, or South Meat Asian. Sign up for 3 months of Hello Flesh, and you'll get a branded carving knife tote. Your friends and neighbors will be impressed with the flavors you can get out of boring human meat with Hello Flesh. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. We do not condone nor endorse eating people.
So refreshed. Such a break. Hello?
Hi.
Is this on? Is this... are we recording?
Yeah. Go for it.
Here? Well, I just did my first movie breakdown, so I feel like...
I'm jumping ahead to 1984, so you might want to go next.
We don't have to do this in chronological order.
Okay. Some of the stuff I might say might jump into your junker time.
Sounds good.
So I did want to sort of go back to a little bit of Wes Craven's approach to filmmaking, and a lot of actors that have worked with him said that he's extremely prepared. He came in with a shot-for-shot list, and in his own life, he loved to write manuals for everything in his house. So he was like very mechanical in the way he approached to getting the shot and creating shot lists.
It's definitely helpful for a genre filmmaker trying to get, money from the producers if you keep coming in on budget and on time.
Yes. And as far as directing actors, he was extremely respectful and never impatient. Actors really responded to Wes and a lot worked with him in multiple movies. And he was an actor's director is what he's been referred to. The first film I want to talk about is A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984.
Ooh, I've heard of that one.
Written and directed by Wes Craven. Nightmare on Elm Street was a really tough sell for him, actually, because his two prior films, Deadly Blessing and Swamp Thing, performed terribly.
Yeah.
And so his earlier success wasn't taken into account at all when he was trying to get this movie made.
It's all, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah, of course. You're only as good, like they say that about chefs, you're only as good as your last meal. You're only as good as your last film, apparently, when you're trying to get funding.
Yeah, I remember when Steven Spielberg was talking about making Lincoln, he talked at length about how difficult it was to get funding. I'm like, what? How many billions of dollars does this guy need to make for you to just write him a goddamn check?
More, probably.
Crazy.
So he ended up having to spend a lot of his own money to get this made.
Wow.
And it
Glad
became...
he did.
What?
Glad he did.
Yeah. Well, it became his producing partner at the time also contributed quite a bit of money, and they raised some money as well. But this became a do or die project for Wes Craven. If this didn't do well, he probably never would have been able to make any of the films that followed this.
It's like Cortez burning his ships when he reached the shore.
Especially in the way that he wanted to make them.
That's awesome.
So this film stars Johnny Depp, Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, and Robert Englund.
England?
Englund?
Yeah.
Englund.
Robert Englund.
So this film is starring Johnny Depp, Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, and Robert Englund.
John Saxon from Enter the Dragon.
Yeah.
And like every other awesome movie.
If you don't know about this movie, I don't know what to tell you.
Welcome to Earth.
It's about a killer in your dreams. So it became
Get
this
out
movie.
of my dreams. That's the movie.
That is
song.
not
No?
the theme song. No.
Into my car.
Beep beep.
I don't need a car, Dad. I've already got a Mercedes.
Oh yeah, that's License to Drive.
Oh, I always get those mixed up.
So this became sort of a new era of horror for Craven. It invigorated the supernatural slasher subgenre.
It became a new era in horror for everybody.
Yeah, it sure did. And then franchises were built around supernatural killers, not only his own, but others as well.
Yeah, no shit.
So he took something like being just a dream and introduces this new horrific element that stalks and kills victims in their nightmares. Freddy Krueger. Robert Englund was just blowing everybody's doors off. That's like a phrase that was used a lot.
I mean, before
about his
that,
performance.
he was largely, I think, a theatrical director and actor, and he was in V. I remember he was in V.
Speaking
V.
of V,
V's
just
so
a
good.
shout out to Tubi. V is on Tubi.
For real?
Every single season.
With Mark Singer.
Yeah.
Oh, who's the lady in V? Lady V? I don't remember.
I don't remember. So, and the makeup turned out to be incredible. And so Wes Craven started having little family and friend gatherings to screen it. And once the film was cut and sound was added, it was playing so well that he was really excited. So the film essentially explores opening your mind to what darkness is out there and not letting the fear consume you, because that's what the primary character, the final girl, Nancy, ultimately has to do in order to defeat Freddy. So you have to beat Freddy by taking away his power, and that power is making you afraid. So by confronting him and not being afraid, not showing that fear, that's how you ultimately defeat him. So the attack on the mind is another, slasher film device, which is so brilliant. He's basically attacking your mind, which essentially kills your body. So in 1994, he came back with Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Which was the 7th one in the franchise.
But it was a sequel to A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's seen as the sequel. But a kind of commentary on how the actual film franchise had an effect on the life and lives of its stars. So it was super meta. And it showed how Freddy, the character of Freddy, was a manifestation of a very real evil that was now locked inside the Elm Street films. And Freddy is in the real world now. So it's self-aware meta horror, and Craven plays himself, and scripts written that he writes become real. So do you want to tell a little bit more about the plot of the movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's so far ahead of its time because, you know, the idea of a quote unquote meta project is I feel kind of all over the place now, but it hadn't really been done like this. He in the film, the conceit is all of the Nightmare films that have come before were actually movies that we all went to go see. And in the world of New Nightmare, the movie is becoming real. So Robert Englund is in New Nightmare as Robert Englund playing Freddy Krueger. Mm-hmm. And he's also Freddy Krueger. It's wild. It's, you know, something that he would tackle, I think, to even greater acclaim later on in Scream, where he was deconstructing the tropes and the rules of the slasher genre. But I mean, he is the rare artist that was not only wildly successful in his own lifetime, but had such a long and successful career that not even by the end of it, this is like the late middle part of his career, he's deconstructing and analyzing his own genre defining work. I mean, it's like an Ouroboros. It's incredible.
Yeah. It is pretty amazing.
And it's also, I've seen all of the Nightmare movies. The only three that are really any good, in my opinion, are the ones that Wes Craven had something to do with. Mm-hmm. 1, 3, and 7. He wrote 3. He wrote and directed 1 and 7, and those are the 3 by far best entries.
And that's sort of why
4's okay.
I said that New Nightmare is a sequel, because it is sort of Wes Craven's sequel to A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
And then understanding everything that's happened in between, you know, it's just really interesting.
And it's a wonderful palate cleanser too, because by that point in the franchise, what was really annoying was like every movie basically involved learning the elaborate rituals and actions you'd have to perform to get Freddy for good this time. They do it, and then the last scene of the movie is like Freddy's hand jumping out or something, and it's like, oh, it was all for nothing. And they never explain in the next movie why he's back. Just it's a whole new set of like hoops to jump through to kill Freddy this time, only that doesn't work either. So it was like really being run into the fucking ground. And to have Wes Craven come back, wrestle his own franchise away from the coked up executives who had been cranking it out for 15 years and to do something so out of the left field and weird with it.
And there hasn't been anything done since.
Not in the they tried a remake that was just utterly soulless.
Yeah.
It was like it looked good, but it had none of the effect. And it's been dead in the water since, because it might just be one of those rare creations that doesn't work without the creator.
Yep. What's up next for you?
Well, we're going back. We're going to Tarantino this shit a little bit. Going to go back to 1977 to one of my very favorite Wes Craven movies, The Hills Have Eyes. This was the movie that redeemed Wes Craven after Last House on the Left was so controversial. Now, it's not that The Hills Have Eyes is a step in a lighter direction. This is an extremely bleak, gory movie. It's not all about rape and sexual violence in the way that Last House on the Left was. So this movie really cemented, I think along with Deliverance, the idea of like the hillbilly clan of cannibals out in the wilderness preying on travelers, you know. Mm-hmm. And it's a clash of civilizations of middle class suburban America going into a place that they just don't belong and suffering the consequences. So Craven based this story, which is essentially Dee Wallace and her her family go into. They shot this in the Mojave Desert, so they go into the desert with their camper and their kids, and they run afoul of a nightmare cannibal clan of mutants, including the very distinctive-looking character actor Michael Berryman.
Yeah,
who,
absolutely.
If you've seen his face, you know who he is. He's a fantastic character actor. He's been around for 40, 50 years at this point.
One of my favorite films that he's been in is Weird Science, because
Yep.
after he's sort of done with his character in the movie, he actually is like, can I take these snacks? Like, he comes in as like a motorcycle demon in that movie, and then he's like, oh, sorry, we didn't mean to make a mess.
He's been
it's really a notable experience.
He's been in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He was in Devil's Rejects, a bunch of Star Trek episodes from like Next Generation and stuff. The thing about Michael Berryman is he has a condition known as hypohydrotic ectodermal dysplasia. Now, that means he has no hair, no fingernails, no sweat glands. He's a very tall man. He's got pointy, sort of elf-like ears. And ultimate respect to Michael Berryman, he has made a 50-year career on this distinctive appearance of his, not just playing, villains. He actually is in a lot of comedies and dramas as well. He's had a varied, wonderful career. He's a great actor. By all accounts, a lovely person as well. He attends a lot of conventions. Anyway, he really stands out in this movie because he stands out anywhere he goes. He's Michael Berryman. He's like so tall too. So this movie, it was loosely based on a Scottish legend, the legend of Shawnee Bean. Now, Shawnee Bean was a man who, along with his wife and something like a couple dozen children, lived in a cave in the 16th century in Scotland. And according to local legends, they would waylay travelers and villagers and cannibalize them. Apparently, King James VI of Scotland had to send troops to go get them. They found the family in a cave surrounded by human remains, and the men were castrated and tortured, and the women were burned, and then the men were drawn and quartered. Now, this probably never happened. It itself closely resembles another old Scottish legend called the Legend of Christie Creek, which is about a 14th century butcher named Andrew Christie who, during a time of war and famine, he became a brigand, and he would use this long crook to pull people off their horses, and he would use his butcher skills to butcher them for meat. That itself is based on even older stories. Basically, there's always been a tale of some weird family in the woods that eats people, and it's probably based in truth. But Shawnee Bean himself probably never existed because there's no contemporaneous accounts of this person, and the first time the story appeared was in a 19th century London tabloid called the Newgate Calendar, which was about like crime and prison, like Newgate prison. But it's a famous story, and it inspired Wes Craven to make this movie, which honestly I think we should consider for a remake, because in 2006 Alexander Aja remade the film. He did High Tension and Crawl, and the remake is awesome. I love the remake. But this is one of my favorites. It's a sweaty, grimy, just violent movie about a killer family of cannibals. But it's got a great cast. It's pretty hardcore. It definitely isn't as sleek as Craven's later movies, which I kind of like. It's got a real 70s vibe. But
it takes place in the desert too. Right?
It does, yeah,
so
and filmed on location in the Mojave.
Yeah, it's got like that wash of the desert.
Absolutely, yeah. It does. Some of it takes place at night, but a lot of it is sun drenched, taking place in the bright daylight. It's really worth a watch. It's one of, I think, Wes Craven's best movies, and an example of his fire and his passion. Making these low budget movies that were really pushing the envelope of what was permissible. So,
yeah,
The Hills Have Eyes. Avoid the sequel. Wes Craven directed himself, and it's really it's a real bummer. It's just not any good. The remake also got a sequel, also not good. So just stay away from anything called The Hills Have Eyes Part 2.
So my next is Scream.
Ah!
I really enjoy the Scream movie. Not so much the sequels, but the newest Scream movie I adore. And I know that the new Scream movie, they because Wes Craven had passed at this point of the release of this film, but they paid homage to him at several times throughout the remake, the newest film.
Did, and
they named one of the characters Wes, and they also dedicated the film to him.
And Scream 4, which I believe was Wes Craven's last film, was also very good.
But I'm just going to talk about the original Scream.
For sure.
The first Scream.
Oh, God.
1996.
I remember seeing it in the theater with my friends.
It was directed by Wes Craven.
Yes, I had friends.
It was written by Kevin Williamson, who is the writer of all of your favorite teen shows. You know it.
Dawson's Creek.
It stars Drew Barrymore, Neve Campbell, Matthew Lillard, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Skeet Ulrich, Jamie, what's his name? Jamie Kennedy. Yep. So
yeah, it's a real who's who of 90s.
Yeah, it sure is. But you know, a lot of these actors had and went on to have lots of success in their careers.
I love Matt Lillard. Big fan. His weird, like, nervous energy.
Yeah,
you know, he's in
great.
Some great movies too.
Well, he
SLC
was just
Punk.
in that Good Girls show, and
yeah.
I really loved that show.
I'm glad he's having a bit of a renaissance. I've always been a big Matt Lillard fan. Lillardessence.
So, just a plot summary: if you have lived in a cave for the last 30 years,
If you are the children of Shawnee Bean,
not to be confused with Sean Bean.
Get out of your
actor.
cave. The who dies in everything he's in.
Right. Ned Stark.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Spoiler alert.
Oh, come on.
A year after her mom dies, Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell, starts to get some strange phone calls, and they find out that it's coming from inside the house. But no, it's from a crazed killer in a white mask and a large black robe, that Scream mask that you all know so well. And the phone calls ask and pose many questions, specifically, what's your favorite scary movie? And along with other type movie trivia. And it ends up with lots of murders and blood around the entirety of the small town of Woodsboro. And Gail Weathers and Deputy Dewey Riley start to investigate who this killer really is.
Deputy Dewey.
Meanwhile, everybody in the movie is, Sydney's taking it seriously, but not many other people are. So, the characters use their knowledge of the horror genre as a weapon against the killer. It's almost a love letter to the slasher film. So that's how I feel like it was Wes Craven creating, like, I want to show all of the film nerds out there, all of the people that love slasher movies, why they love slasher movies and why you should, and really lift up the genre.
Yeah, but it's also kind of controversial. It's like an illusionist telling the audience, here's how I do all my tricks.
Right, but he does say only true horror fans can survive. At least that's the illusion that the killer does display, is if you are a true horror fan. So case in point, Casey,
Drew Barrymore's
character, doesn't know the movie trivia.
Audience, I got it right when
so
I saw it in the theater.
She's doomed.
When I was 16.
I'm sure you said it out loud, too, and everybody
did.
that was with you loved it.
I said it quietly.
So she's obviously doomed. She doesn't know her horror trivia. So Scream created this, like...
She does pretty well.
She does okay.
Yeah.
The Jason one.
That's
a hard one. If you ask anybody.
Classic mistake.
But everyone knows, who the murderer was in the first Friday the 13th. If you don't know it, then I guess you're not really a horror movie fan.
And you deserve to die.
Well, that's not true.
In this movie, it is.
In this movie. So Scream leaned into that meta horror genre that Wes Craven has now started to solidify. And in a lot of slasher films after, you can see its influence. For good or bad, you can see it. And he brought what I think he really brought substance, plot, character development, and relatability to this slasher film, and sort of changed what a slasher film could be. It wasn't just about, senseless, brainless people running from a killer because they happened to be on, somebody else's property or had sex or whatever the case may be. This was like actually people that have survived trauma and have real life experiences that they're trying to work through and just live their lives. And then, overcome these in some circumstances. And you have this sort of band of misfits coming together to help overtake or at least reveal the baddie in Scream, which is essentially Sidney Prescott, Neve Campbell's character, and Gale Weathers, Courtney Cox's character, supported by the worst sheriff or deputy in the entire universe of any movie. Yeah. He is a terrible police officer.
Deputy Dewey.
But somehow, by dumb luck, he just ends up sort of helping the women survive.
You'd think after like the third time this shit happens, right, that this small police force in a small town would become the absolute expert in one thing and develop like an ironclad fucking plan for the inevitable next time it happens. And yet every movie, they're like completely unprepared for this thing that keeps happening.
In the most recent version, he's left.
No, I understand that.
He's
I'm just
no
saying,
longer a cop.
But he's in all of them.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I know.
Dewey, on a weekend, write down in a notebook everything you've gone through.
He's just a small town cop.
Well, that actually, so I'll get into that in a minute because I want to stay on Scream because I have certainly come around to Scream. I hated it when it first came out.
Because you took it as an insult to your horror knowledge, right? Is that a good assumption?
Sure. I primarily didn't like it because not to be like a jerk or anything, I've never been much of a fan of Kevin Williamson's writing style. Just the cadence of it and the dialogue, whatever. But the main reason Wes Craven has always been just really ahead of his time, and it took me a while to sort of really understand Scream. It had the unfortunate effect, as things do in Hollywood, of being a big hit, and then for the next 20 years, everyone tried to copy it, but no one could come close. So you had movies like Urban Legend and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and all these misfires that were cheap attempts to cash in on Scream without coming near what Scream actually was. And it really wasn't until recently when people who watched Scream as a teenager, now they're making films, you start getting movies like You're Next.
It's pronounced Screamager.
Yeah. You start getting You're Next or Ready or Not, these and actually the directors of Ready or Not. Yeah, Happy Death Day. The directors of Ready or Not are the ones who went on to do Scream 5. It just, now it feels like people really have processed what Wes Craven was doing with this movie and have started to really play in this new genre he helped kickstart instead of just trying to do a half-assed carbon copy of it.
I think one thing we're bringing to the surface is Wes Craven's approach and directorial style has always been ahead of its time.
100%.
And, Sidney Prescott is an interesting final girl, or what you would think of a final girl. You don't need to always, quote unquote, be brave. She was very afraid in this first movie.
And in later sequels, she's extremely reluctant.
Yeah.
Everyone sort of looks to her like, oh, aren't you going to save the day? And she's like, are you kidding? I just want to live.
I'm just a regular person.
Yeah.
But then, she goes through what's really interesting, I think, if you look at her character throughout all of the Scream films and how she almost goes through the different stages of grief while she's developing as a character. That one movie, I think it's maybe the third movie, where she's totally locked away, remote, where no one can find her. She's got all kinds of high-tech security, and she just like hides away, like nobody's going to find her and no one's going to hurt her and no one's going to bother her.
It's interesting what you said about that reinvigorating the slasher genre, because it didn't start that way. Slasher movies in their earliest incarnation, like giallo films from Italy, Mario Bava's, Dario Argento, they were smart, sexy, sophisticated murder thrillers. They were, some of them were kind of trashy, but they weren't stupid. And it really wasn't until the mid 80s you start to notice, like Jason in early movies was a much more interesting killer, and by the mid-'80s, he's only killing drug addicts and drifters and homeless people and minorities, and you can really feel the Reaganization and the sort of Puritan bullshit, the satanic panic playing into that time period. And Wes Craven is sort of restoring the genre with Scream, bringing it back. I mean, we all think he's breaking ground. He's actually clearing the way again.
Think about visually how polished Scream was, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you first saw it, how, like stylized and colorful. It was like, to Kevin Williamson's credit, it was like any horror lovers take on what would happen in Dawson's Creek if a murderer came there and slashed everybody.
It's interesting that this movie was released by Dimension, which was, Harvey Weinstein's company, because Scream is sort of like it's a direct attack on Harvey Weinstein's effect on the genre in the 90s of just farting out endless sequels and grinding these movies into, cash grab franchises, direct to video, direct to DVD, over and over ad nauseum. He did it to Nightmare. He did it to Halloween. He did it to Hellraiser, most especially.
Which is why I really talk about the Nightmare on Elm Street, amazing.
Yeah.
A New Nightmare, amazing. I'm not really going to talk about the in between because I feel like it is a dismantling of the purity of the original, and then
it's like
what followed,
like the Rambo sequels. How First Blood is like a interesting take on post PTSD and what we did to soldiers at the time, and then the sequels are just flag waving jingoistic bullshit.
So, but I think it's an interesting timing because I think a lot of people. And maybe Kevin Williamson played into this. I'd like to think he did. That people really shat all over, the characters of Dawson's Creek. And maybe this was a sort of self-gratifying way of, I'm going to give you that type of character, but they're going to all get killed.
Yeah. Another thing I've really come to appreciate about Scream is Wes Craven's taking down of gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. God, I fucking hate gatekeepers. I've always been a nerdy, bookish type, not really into sports and stuff. And it bums me the fuck out when fellow nerds are so cruel to each other and dictating what you're supposed to like and how you're supposed to enjoy something. That just bums me out so much because I'm like, aren't we bullied enough by other groups that we have to gatekeep each other and make rules on how we're supposed to have fun?
Listen, I read a lot, and I am now, I don't know, maybe in the past I was a little reluctant to say, what my favorite genre of book was, but it is thriller. It's not the only genre of book I read, and I enjoy all kinds of books, all kinds of genres, all types. But I would say that The most satisfied I feel is reading thrillers, whether they're good or not great. When a thriller is good, there's nothing better. When a thriller is not great, it's still enjoyable.
There's really only two questions to anything: is, are you hurting anyone? Are you enjoying yourself? If the answer is no, and then yes, go for it.
Yeah.
But I love how, the killers of Scream were essentially just toxic. Yeah, this is a little bit before.
Again, ahead of his time.
Yeah,
That's
toxic online fanboys. Like, you can picture Skeet Ulrich and Matthew Lillard like freaking out about The Last Jedi and running Kelly Marie Tran off the internet.
Yeah,
like, it's that kind of toxic fandom bullshit.
It's like, yeah.
They think they own horror movies and they're punishing people that don't pay enough respect to it.
Yep.
And it's like really great to see them get it in the end.
You really stabbed me, man.
So I'm just gonna, God, I could talk about Wes Craven all day. I'm just gonna go for one last movie because I feel like it's one a lot of people overlook and you shouldn't. It's 1991's The People Under the Stairs.
Ooh, watch your ankles.
I'm just gonna throw it out there. This movie's nuts. It's nuts. It's hard to describe, honestly. So the short of it is, a young boy named Poindexter, but everyone calls him Fool because after the tarot card.
Is it Point or Point?
Poindexter. So that's played by Brandon Quinton Adams, who you might recognize as the little boy from the Moonwalker music video. He's had a career ever since, but Anyway, so Fool, he's a young black boy. His mother's sick. He his sister is doing their best. They're about to be evicted by their horrible landlords who live in a mansion in the suburbs. They don't even live in the neighborhood. So Fool hooks up with Leroy, who's Ving Rhames' character. They're going to rob these people. This is Ving Rhames before Pulp Fiction. And he's svelte in this movie. So they break into the landlord's mansion, and the landlords are played by, very memorably, by Everett McGill and Wendy Roby, who you probably remember as Big Ed and Nadine Hurley from Twin Peaks.
And they're just called Men and Women.
They're called Man and Woman. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Fool and Leroy and this other guy break into the house, and they discover there's a lot going on there, and they become trapped. Now, Everett McGill and Wendy Roby, Man and Woman, turns out that they're brother and sister, but they kind of have an incestuous relationship. They've lived in this house this family has lived in this house for generations, and they've been buying up all the urban properties and evicting people and selling the properties. And they're like NIMBY, yuppie, racist assholes, gentrifying neighborhoods and kicking people out. Now, inside their mansion, they have traps and torture rooms, and they're cannibals, and Everett McGill has a full-body leather gimp suit, and he runs around with a shotgun.
Yikes.
They've been luring people in for generations and, trying to create the perfect family. So what ends up happening is they've got a bunch of people that are now like mutants that live in the walls of the house with their tongue. They can't speak. They've got their tongues cut out. And for some reason, their faces are weird. Like they kind of look like Nightbreed.
Maybe because they haven't gotten any sun.
Well, yeah, I think the idea is they haven't gotten sun. But the
vitamins.
makeup is like a little, like, not getting sun for a few years wouldn't make you do that. But so it's nuts. Like there's a lot of weird psychosexual stuff. There are these cannibals that live inside the walls. You're not really sure who the good guys and bad guys are, except for Man and Woman. They're pretty bad. Everett McGill and Wendy Roby are spectacular. I mean, they're just bananas crazy, over the top.
Nadine.
Everett calls her mommy. It's like that kind of vibe. But there's a lot going on there about gentrification, about class struggle, about, NIMBY white suburbia. The thing is it's almost a classic. The movie, it's a dark comedy for sure, which in 1991.
I didn't know what NIMBY meant, and I just looked it
yeah,
up.
it just stands for Not in My Backyard.
Yeah.
So it's basically that kind of well-off, usually white suburban person that
I think
is
most people would know Not in My Backyard.
are like, you're not opening up a shelter. So anyway, the humor doesn't always land. I will say that Ving Rhames by far has the best lines in this movie. He's just got some real.
He also has the voice to deliver like
Oh,
one-liners.
I mean,
really
he's great,
well.
but there are some weird, like he's breaking Ving Rhames' character Leroy. He's breaking into this house. He's Ving Rhames, so he stands out in a crowd, is in an all-white suburban neighborhood, breaking into a mansion in the middle of the day, wearing like a Dr. Cosby Afro-centric.
It's really colorful. It's like black leather with all of the bright colors like green. And,
it's like
what you would think Salt and Pepper was
exactly.
wearing.
It's exactly like the early 90s kind of Afrocentric revised style, and he's doing that to do a B&E. So whatever. But honestly, it does have a lot to say. The message works. There are just elements in the movie that kind of fall flat, but God, it's so entertaining.
Yeah.
It is so entertaining to watch Everett McGill and Wendy Roby just be bonkers crazy. And they play such wonderful villains that sometimes it's nice to watch a movie where the bad guys are just so bad that you're like, go for it. Mm-hmm. Like I'm all for a morally complex movie, but I don't know. Sometimes you just want to watch Everett McGill run around in a gimp suit and, shoot shotguns at cannibals. It's
maybe
a wild
you
ride.
Do.
It's a wild
maybe
ride.
some people listening.
But it's like all movies of that era, it has to end on like a really bad early rap song. I don't know, for our younger listeners, early rap was like extended storytelling. It was the songs. I feel like most of the songs were about just like what you did that day. Be like, I woke up this morning and I went downtown, went to my friends, and said,
today
he's
was
a clown.
A good day.
Yeah,
I mean,
or
that's
like
a great song.
Sugar Hill Gang, that kind of stuff. It was all like, did the chicken taste like wood? It was just like, I'm just singing in a lyrical cadence about what I did today. It wasn't until like Wu-Tang and Tupac came around that they started singing about real shit. But so it's got one of those. I mean, this is like the era of Do the Bartman. I don't mean to shit on this movie because I honestly love it. I think it's fucking brilliant. It's really an entertaining, strange little gem in this man's career. And I'm so blown away by the fact that after Wes Craven has experienced massive commercial success, he goes, I'm going to make The People Under the Stairs. One thing against the movie, that has The People Under the Stairs is maybe one of the greatest titles. It definitely, when I was a kid going into video shops before I was allowed to watch movies like this, it caught my eye because of the title. And the movie doesn't quite live up to the promise of The People Under the Stairs. That's, I think, the danger of giving your movie such a rad title right off the bat. But it is absolutely worth it. I would put it, it's not quite up to Society levels in terms of like that sort of suburban social commentary, but it's almost there.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of fun.
Well, my last one is Red Eye.
Oh, that's a good one.
From 2005.
I mean, these are all good ones.
So if you haven't seen Red Eye, it's not a slasher film. It is a Wes Craven film, obviously, because this is who we're talking about here today.
That's convenient.
And as I mentioned, it came out in 2005. I really, when I first saw this, and then I recently rewatched this film, I really liked it, and I actually saw some things that I didn't see, or like depth that I didn't see the first time. So it was directed obviously by Wes Craven, and just a brief synopsis is Lisa, who's played by Rachel McAdams, is a hotel manager, and she's always dealing with difficult customers, and she's taking a red-eye flight back to Miami because her grandmother had just died. Brian Cox plays her father. We see him in a few scenes. Brian Cox, you guys.
He's in one or two things. I think
he's the patriarch in Succession, if you don't know who I'm talking about.
Or just the guy in 9 out of 10 movies that come out every year.
And then she meets Jackson, played by Cillian Murphy, who's charming and charismatic, but he's a stranger, and they talk about airport stuff and end up having a cocktail before the flight takes off, and he sort of blows her off, and she's like, okay. And coincidentally, they're on the same flight, seatmates to each other, which we find out later is not a coincidence. So we find out that Jackson is employed by a terrorist organization that is trying to murder a high-powered guest that's staying at Lisa's hotel. And there's a hitman outside of her dad's house ready to kill him if she doesn't comply. So what's interesting is as soon as they take off, you are like, oh, this guy's so charming. He's into her. Is he into her? Is she into him? She gets a little tipsy. And then he starts with his gaslighting, as you mentioned earlier. And he really tries to break her down to get what he wants.
It's uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable. So,
because like I feel like we've all been in a situation where you're watching a couple that's going on, and you're like, oh God.
Exactly. So Cillian Murphy's charisma is showing a different type of monster, a different type of killer. I mean, he is a killer. Cillian Murphy is so unique because he can really go between character acting and lead character work. And so just like us, he doesn't seem to be an overly handsome guy or overly like, this is the man of my dreams. He's the one, he's just like a regular average guy. And then when he does reveal himself, it becomes sort of a battle of wits between Jackson and Lisa. Because her strength that he tries to dismantle is the ability for her to problem solve. That's what she does all day at her job. So he presents her with a problem. I am going to have your dad killed. And the solution is you move this guy from one room in your hotel to another. That's it. That's your problem. This is how you solve it. And so what makes her vulnerable to him is actually what she uses to overcome in this situation. And she is a great final girl.
Another unlikely hero.
Yeah. And it sort of reveals slowly a lot of the scenes, and a lot of his approach to her is that voyeuristic, there's a scene that takes place in the plane's bathroom that is very much like a sexual assault. There isn't a sexual assault, but it is very much like one. And she has a scar on her chest, and it never describes what it's from, although she does give a sentence about it happened in a parking lot at one point in the film. But her father's overprotection of always checking in on her, the scar, the reason why she's able to physically survive and overtake him, and her sort of self-defense skills that you can see, you all start piecing this together, that she was raped. Not by him, but by someone else. And she survived that. And now basically she's going to survive this too. And the pacing of the movie is super tense. It's the kind of thing that leaves you like on the edge of your seat. I think it's 85 minutes, so it's very tight.
Yeah, it's nothing's wasted.
The last 10, 15 minutes of the movie is very tense, very stressful, and very satisfying. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's really about 3 central characters, 2.5 central characters. Rachel McAdams, Cillian Murphy, and then, Brian Cox also as that, dad role. So I think it's amazing. I love it. I rewatched it. It's still great. Check it out.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite Wes Craven.
To deviate from his winning formula so late in his career and
Yeah.
to knock it out of the park again. That's Wes Craven for you.
But essentially, he did have that slasher. It was almost like a mental slasher. He was trying to stalk her and torture her.
Well, the way a slasher killer takes people
Psychologically
out one at a time, he is breaking her down piece by piece by piece. Yeah, no, it's very good. One of the themes that plays through most of his movies is terrible parents, or really just terrible authority. You can see it.
Non-existent parents that don't listen, parents that aren't protective,
and also with police,
except for
the police that don't listen, the police that don't react well, the police that show up too late. You've got in Nightmare on Elm Street, they're both one and the same, the cops and her parents. But you see it in The People Under the Stairs. The cops show up to this nightmare mansion, and they're just like, "Oh, everything looks fine. You offered me tea." Yeah,
they just
exactly.
get away with it. They're just kids in high school, and they're just killing.
And I think Wes Craven really plays with the audience and keeps them off balance by
there's no help for you.
Yes, assuming that people assume the cops are going to come and make everything better, and in Wes Craven
your parents
movies
are going to come and make everything better. And honestly, what
they make it worse.
Showing you is that this is independent self-sufficiency. You are the one that can fight. You are the one that can survive. No one else can survive for you.
It's nice that someone from that era maintained that hippie distrust of authority and didn't go full Reagan like so many others in that time period, because he really, as someone who was raised in the 80s, he really skewers the laissez-faire parenting of that time period, and it's interesting to watch as two people that sort of experienced that.
Well, I do think that Brian Cox's dad character in Red Eye might have benefited from not being able to protect her when she was sexually assaulted, and now trying to be overprotective and over involved in everything that's happening.
Well, before we wrap up, I just want to give a quick little bit of love to a couple Wes Craven movies that maybe aren't the best, but I just love them so much. Talking about 1989's Shocker, which got Peter Berg and Mitch Pileggi, where Peter Berg is like the secret son of a serial killer who gets electrocuted, but then after his electrocution, he comes back as like living lightning that also continues killing people. It's not a great movie, but it also kind of is. And I'll never forget, the trailer was really, really good. And I saw it when I was a kid, and I'm like, I got to see this movie. And I ran into Mitch Pileggi when he was on a run once in North Hollywood, and I yelled out, "Hey, Horace Pinker," which was his character. And I don't know if anybody yells that at Mitch Pileggi. So, and the other one I think came out a year before, The Serpent and the Rainbow, in 1988 with Bill Pullman.
So strange and
it's
scary and weird.
It's very loosely based on a book by ethnobiologist and anthropologist Wade Davis, which I did read. That book itself is a bit controversial. It's about an ethnobiologist who goes to Haiti looking for this powder that the Vodun priests, Bokors, like the witch doctors, that they use to create zombies, to stupefy people and turn them into sort of zombie slaves. So the movie is extremely, extremely loosely based. It's almost nothing to do with the book. But it's a lot of fun to watch Bill Pullman and the late, great...
I wouldn't say fun, but...
the late, great Paul Winfield especially is wonderful in this movie. And Bill Pullman gets his nuts nailed to a wooden plank at one point, which is not in the book, but that happens. Serpent in the Rainbow. It's got a really cheesy poster too. You should look it up. But it's an interesting watch. They shot a lot of it on location in Haiti, but then had to leave for the Dominican Republic when local gangs told them, "Get the fuck out." So, yeah, it's like another oddity in this man's filmography. So,
yeah, absolutely
worth checking out.
Well, hopefully you got a lot of good insight on Wes Craven and maybe are now intrigued by some movies you haven't seen of his. Maybe rewatch some that you have
I'll
with
admit,
a different mindset.
I came to a much deeper appreciation of Wes Craven in preparing for this episode, and I'm. It's not that I wasn't a fan, but like I have more respect for him now.
Just check out the way that female heroines are treated in some of his films from like the 90s and beyond, and I think you'll really be impressed. And
if you're watching A Nightmare on Elm Street, the 1984 version, be on the lookout in the
that poster
in the coroner's office. The scene in the coroner's office or the medical examiner, he has a calendar on his desk that just keep an eye out for it.
When we rewatched it, we laughed.
I mean,
so
I've seen
hard.
that movie like 10 times
never
and never
noticed
it.
It's
and then when you do notice it, you can never ever unsee
There's
it.
also something over. We never even talked about her mom.
Oh,
the actress and singer that plays her mom.
Yeah, and she's just like drunk and
she's just oblivious. But there's something over her shoulder in the house at one point too. That's pretty funny.
Don't talk to me about anything unpleasant
during the day. I have to go. I have to put my lipstick on.
That's what I'm saying. It's so familiar.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Suspanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're standing right behind you.